Hello Zenith women and welcome to the channel. The most dangerous person is the one who stayed silent, observed everything and finally decided they've had enough. There's a common misconception that Sigma females are endlessly patient, indifferent or simply too cool to let things get to them. Wrong. They're not immune to frustration, they just have an incredibly high threshold. But when that threshold is shattered, that's when things get interesting. Psychologists say that people who rarely express anger tend to explode in the most unpredictable ways when they finally do. And a Sigma female? She doesn't just explode, she evolves. She won't throw a tantrum, she won't seek validation, and she certainly won't waste energy explaining herself. She'll simply shift, and when she does, the entire dynamic changes. Think of it like a software update you weren't prepared for. Except this time, the bug fixes include deleting toxic people, upgrading her boundaries, and permanently disabling access to those who took her kindness for weakness. So, what happens when a Sigma female finally snaps? Buckle up, because it's not just a moment, it's a warning shot to the universe. Number 1, she becomes colder than ice, but sharper than a blade. When a Sigma female has had enough, she doesn't explode in an emotional outburst. She doesn't scream, cry, or beg for anyone to understand her. Instead, she turns cold, dangerously cold. But beneath that ice is a blade, sharp and calculated, ready to cut through everything that no longer serves her. She has tolerated more than she should have. She has let things slide, given people the benefit of the doubt, and stayed silent in situations where she should have walked away. But the moment she snaps, there is no going back. Her warmth disappears, and with it any trace of tolerance she once had. Her energy is no longer available for small talk, fake apologies, or half-hearted attempts to mend what's already broken. This is not passive aggressiveness. It's not an attempt to prove a point. It's a full psychological shift. People who once had access to her realize they're now talking to a version of her they don't recognize. She no longer reacts the way they expect. The usual ways to manipulate her no longer work. Guilt-tripping, useless, gaslighting, laughable, playing the victim, not her problem anymore. Her presence, once reassuring, becomes intimidating. She listens, but only to decide what deserves a response. She observes, but only to confirm what she already knew. And when she does speak, every word is deliberate, cutting through nonsense with precision. The kindness she once extended without question is now locked behind a wall that very few will ever get through again. People feel the shift before they even understand it. They sense that something is different, something is missing. What's missing is her patience. What's missing is her willingness to entertain anything beneath her standards. The coldness isn't cruelty, it's clarity. And the blade? That's her sharp understanding of exactly who she is, who she's done with, and what she will never allow again. Number 2, she burns bridges but leaves the ashes as a warning. When a Sigma female burns a bridge, she doesn't just walk away and hope things fade into the past. She makes sure the bridge is reduced to ashes, and those ashes serve as a permanent reminder there's no way back. She doesn't do second chances. She doesn't reopen closed doors, and she certainly doesn't entertain half-hearted attempts at reconciliation. Once she decides she's done, it's over. This isn't about pettiness or revenge, it's about self-respect. She gives people time, space, and opportunities to do right, but when they repeatedly prove they won't, she erases their access to her entirely. She doesn't leave room for ambiguity, no mixed signals, no lingering attachments, no opportunity to wiggle back into her life under the guise of let's talk. If someone took her kindness for weakness, they learn, too late, that her boundaries are made of steel. Some might call it cold, some might call it ruthless. But what they fail to understand is that a Sigma female doesn't hold on to dead weight. She doesn't believe in dragging relationships, friendships, or situationships that no longer serve her. If it's toxic, exhausting, or one-sided, she lights the match herself. She won't stick around waiting for closure or hoping someone changes. She doesn't need dramatic exits or emotional send-offs. Her goodbye is silent but final, and that silence echoes louder than any words ever could. The real impact of her departure isn't felt immediately, it hits later, when the absence of her energy becomes undeniable. When the conversation she once carried turned dull, when the support she gave is nowhere to be found, that's when people realize what they lost, and by then, it's too late. Because the ashes of that burned bridge, They are a testament to a lesson learned too late. Once a Sigma female decides you're no longer part of her world, you never will be again. Number 3, her revenge isn't loud, but it's devastatingly precise. A Sigma female doesn't waste energy on petty revenge. She doesn't scream, throw tantrums, or create messy drama. That's amateur behavior, and she's far too strategic for that. When she's been wronged, she doesn't just react, she calculates, she observes, she waits. And when the time is right, she delivers a response so precise that it feels less like revenge and more like a cosmic correction. She doesn't chase karma, she becomes it. She knows that emotional outbursts give the other person a sense of power, so she denies them that satisfaction. There are no warning shots, no desperate attempts to make them understand what they've done. Instead, she disappears, withdraws her energy, and lets the absence of her presence start the punishment. That alone is enough to make most people spiral. But for those who truly cross the line, she ensures they feel the weight of their actions in a way they never saw coming. Her revenge isn't about destruction, it's about exposure. She doesn't need to ruin anyone, she simply lets them reveal who they truly are. She removes herself from the equation, and suddenly their manipulations, lies, and deceit have nowhere to hide. People start seeing them for who they are without her around to soften the perception. Their own behavior becomes their downfall, and she doesn't have to lift a finger. If she does take action, it's never impulsive. It's a surgical strike. She goes after weak spots, vulnerabilities, and the things people take for granted. And when the impact lands, it's not just painful, it's inescapable. There's no dramatic confrontation, no messy social media feud. Just the slow, undeniable realization that she played the long game, and they lost before they even knew the game had begun. By the time they realize what's happening, it's already over. She's moved on, thriving, untouchable. And they're left sitting in the wreckage of their own mistakes, wondering how they never saw it coming. Number 4, the words she chooses are her lethal weapon. When a Sigma female finally snaps, she doesn't raise her voice. She sharpens her words. She has spent too much time observing, too much time understanding the weaknesses, insecurities, and contradictions of those around her. So when she speaks, she doesn't waste a single syllable. Her words don't just hurt, they cut, clean, deep, and in a way that lingers long after the conversation is over. She doesn't rely on insults or cheap shots. That would be too easy. Instead, she delivers truth so brutal, so undeniable, that they dismantle a person from the inside out. She won't call you a liar. She'll remind you of every time you twisted reality to suit yourself. She won't say you're weak. She'll lay out in perfect detail every moment you failed to stand up for yourself. She won't just tell you she's done. She'll explain with cold precision why you were never as important as you thought you were. The worst part? She's calm, detached. There's no emotional outburst, no desperation to be understood. That's what makes it unbearable. Most people expect anger, yelling, or dramatic exits. Instead, they get a cold, surgical dissection of exactly who they are. And because she has always been a quiet observer, she knows exactly what to say to leave a lasting scar. Some people recover, most don't, because long after she's gone, her words replay in their minds. They try to dismiss them, to brush them off, but deep down they know she was right. That's what makes it so devastating. She doesn't just say things to hurt, she says things that force people to see themselves in a way they can't unsee. And that's a wound that never fully heals. Number 5, she'll make you realize you were only borrowing her energy. A Sigma female never truly gives herself away. She allows people into her world. There's a difference. She doesn't attach easily, doesn't need validation, and doesn't rely on others to define her worth. So, when she's present in someone's life, it's a privilege, not a guarantee. People mistake her presence for permanence, assuming that just because she's there, she always will be. But that's the biggest illusion of all. She isn't the type to constantly demand attention or make her presence loud. She exists in a way that's effortless, yet deeply felt. Her energy is rare, calm, intelligent, and magnetic in a way that makes people feel seen and understood. They lean on it, get used to it, and start thinking it's theirs. That's their mistake. Because the moment she decides she's done, she withdraws, and that withdrawal feels like a black hole swallowing everything they once took for granted. It's not just that she leaves. It's that she takes her energy with her. The conversations that once had depth feel hollow. The confidence she once encouraged starts to waver. The stability she provided suddenly turns to chaos. And the people who never truly appreciated her presence, they start feeling a void they can't quite explain. They search for replacements, but nothing quite fills the space she left behind. This isn't about arrogance, it's about reality. A Sigma female doesn't give endlessly. She chooses where her energy flows, and once she sees that it's being drained instead of valued, she shuts it off completely. Not gradually, not with hesitation, completely. By the time they realize what they lost, it's too late, because the harsh truth is they never really had her to begin with. They were only borrowing what she allowed them to experience. And once she takes it back, they finally understand the difference between having someone and merely being allowed in their presence. Number 6. She no longer cares about being the bigger person. A Sigma female spends most of her life choosing the high road, staying detached and avoiding unnecessary conflict. She believes in self-respect, not petty games. But when she's been pushed past her limit, when disrespect has been served one too many times, the concept of being the bigger person stops mattering. Not because she's lost control, but because she no longer sees the point in taking the noble path for people who have none. She doesn't believe in senseless revenge, but she also doesn't believe in letting things slide anymore. If someone insists on playing dirty, she won't hesitate to show them she can play the game better. The difference? She's strategic, not reckless. She doesn't act out of impulse, she acts out of necessity. If someone thinks they can manipulate, deceive, or walk over her without consequence, she'll respond in a way that ensures they never make that mistake again. This isn't about becoming cruel, it's about matching energy. If someone keeps testing her patience, she'll stop providing it. If someone chooses betrayal, she'll make sure they experience it in return. If someone underestimates her ability to fight back, she'll remind them, swiftly and efficiently, that she's more than capable. She has spent too much time being reasonable, being silent, being above it all. When she's done, and that means the gloves come off. She no longer seeks to preserve someone's feelings, reputation, or comfort at the expense of her own dignity. She stops caring about whether people think she's being too harsh or not forgiving enough. Those are concerns for people who still have something to prove. A Sigma female, she has nothing to prove, and that's what makes her dangerous. If someone brings out a side of her that isn't pleasant, they only have themselves to blame. She didn't choose to become this version of herself, they forced it. And once she reaches this point, there's no negotiation, no second chances, no let's talk this out. She becomes exactly what the situation calls for, and by then it's too late for anyone to stop her. Number 7, she won't argue, she'll let reality do the talking. A Sigma female has no interest in arguing, pleading, or convincing anyone of anything. She has spent enough time explaining, giving people chances, and watching them ignore the obvious. At some point, she realizes that words are useless on those who don't want to understand. So instead of wasting her breath, she steps back and lets life do the talking for her. She knows that people who mistreat others always meet their reckoning, and she doesn't need to lift a finger to make it happen. She doesn't need revenge, closure, or some dramatic confrontation. She simply removes herself, and that alone sets everything in motion. Without her presence, people quickly start feeling the consequences of their actions. The support she once provided, gone. The stability she offered, no longer there. The benefit of the doubt she used to extend, that door is permanently shut. She watches, emotionless, as reality plays out exactly how she knew it would. The ones who thought they could take advantage of her suddenly find themselves struggling. The ones who lied to her eventually expose themselves. The ones who assumed she would always be there come to the painful realization that she was never an option. They were simply privileged to know her. She doesn't argue because she knows. She doesn't chase because she knows. And she doesn't explain because, frankly, it's not her job to teach people what life is already preparing to show them. This approach unsettles people. They expect pushback, a reaction, something that confirms they still have control over the situation. But when she gives them nothing, no words, no emotions, no attempts to fix things, it terrifies them. Because deep down, they realize they miscalculated. They thought they had time. They thought they could manipulate. They thought they could win. Instead, they find themselves alone, dealing with the mess they created. By the time they finally understand, by the time they wish they could go back and listen to what she was saying all along, she's already moved on, and there's nothing left to say. Number 8, she becomes unapologetically selfish, and it's terrifying. A Sigma female is naturally independent, but for most of her life she still cares. She gives people chances, extends understanding, and tries to be fair. She listens when she shouldn't, forgives when it's undeserved, and considers how her actions affect others, often at her own expense. But when she's had enough, that version of her no longer exists. She becomes unapologetically selfish, and it's not the kind of selfishness people are used to. This isn't arrogance or recklessness. It's something colder, sharper, and far more unsettling. She no longer adjusts herself to make others comfortable. She no longer considers how people will feel about the choices she makes. She no longer sacrifices her peace for the sake of maintaining relationships that have already proven unworthy. The people who once benefited from her kindness start feeling the shift immediately. The friend who always needed advice, left on read, the partner who relied on her emotional labor. Suddenly they're talking to a version of her that doesn't care to fix things, the family member who expected her to always be the responsible one. They realize she's no longer carrying burdens that aren't hers. What makes this terrifying is the sheer finality of it. She doesn't explain, doesn't argue, and doesn't give warnings. She simply stops caring in the way she used to. And for those who took her selflessness for granted, it's a rude awakening. They don't just lose access to her time and energy, they lose the version of her that once cared to make things easier for them. People call her changed, but they fail to understand that this isn't a change, it's a return to who she was before she let the wrong people convince her that she owed them parts of herself. Now she gives to herself first, and if there's anything left, maybe others get a fraction of it. She doesn't feel guilty, she doesn't look back. And if people find her new version unsettling, that's their problem. She finally understands something they never did. Her energy is hers to keep, not theirs to drain. Number 9, she'll sabotage a system, not just a person. When a Sigma female has been betrayed on a deep enough level, she doesn't just walk away. She ensures that everything built on deception, manipulation, or exploitation crumbles behind her. She isn't interested in petty retaliation or emotional outbursts. She plays a much bigger game. If the betrayal came from a person, they will feel the loss of her presence in ways they never anticipated. But if the betrayal came from an entire system, a toxic workplace, a corrupt organization, a dysfunctional social structure, she doesn't just exit. She dismantles. She has spent time observing, analyzing, and understanding the weak points of the system she was part of. While others blindly follow, she has been silently taking notes. She knows exactly where the cracks are, where the hypocrisy lies, and where the pressure points can make everything collapse. And when she decides to act, she doesn't just expose a single person, she exposes everything. A toxic workplace that tried to undermine her, she won't just quit. She'll leave behind the kind of truth that forces leadership into a crisis, the social circle that thrived on manipulation. She won't just stop talking to them, she'll make sure the lies and power dynamics that kept it functioning are dragged into the light. The person who thought they could betray her and move on, she'll make sure their own actions haunt them, not through revenge, but through a well-placed unraveling of their carefully constructed facade. What makes this terrifying is her patience. She doesn't rush. She doesn't act in anger. She waits for the moment when the damage will be most effective, most undeniable, and completely irreversible. And when she strikes, it's not with noise or chaos, it's with a precision that ensures there's no coming back from it. By the time people realize what's happening, the foundation is already collapsing, and she's already gone, watching from a distance, knowing she didn't destroy anything, she simply let it destroy itself. Number 10, she becomes a phantom in your life, gone but haunting. When a Sigma female is done, she doesn't just leave, she erases herself from your world. No explanations, no dramatic exits, no final warnings. One day she's there, and the next it's as if she never existed. But that's where people get it wrong, because even though she's physically gone, her absence doesn't just fade into the background, it haunts. At first, people assume they'll move on easily. They tell themselves they don't need her. They downplay her importance. But then the realization creeps in slowly, painfully. Conversations feel emptier without her insight. Challenges feel heavier without her quiet strength. Their world feels duller, as if something vital is missing, and it is. The space she once filled becomes impossible to ignore. She doesn't have to do anything to remind them of what they lost. That's the most unsettling part. She isn't watching. She isn't waiting, and she certainly isn't looking back. The haunting comes from within, because deep down they know they had access to something rare and they squandered it. And now they will never find it again. They try to replace her, try to fill the void with distractions, but nothing works. No one listens like she did. No one understands them in the effortless way she once did. No one carries the same quiet power, the same presence that made them feel both challenged and safe at the same time. And the worst part? They know she isn't thinking about them. They know she has moved on without hesitation, without regret. She becomes a ghost, not in the sense that she lingers, but in the way her absence becomes louder than her presence ever was. And every time they feel that emptiness, every time they reach for something that's no longer there, they're forced to relive the same truth over and over again. They lost something they will never ever get back. Number 11, she won't just walk away, she'll walk over what's left of the situation. When a Sigma female is done, she doesn't just leave quietly, she makes a statement without saying a word. She doesn't beg, she doesn't plead, and she definitely doesn't exit looking defeated. No matter how much she was disrespected, underestimated, or betrayed, she ensures that when she walks away, it's not just a departure, it's a declaration. She doesn't sneak out the back door, hoping things resolve themselves. She walks straight through the front, head high, making it clear that she's leaving because she chooses to, not because she was forced out. And if people thought they could break her, they quickly realize she's more unshaken than ever. Any damage they try to inflict, she wears it as armor. Any attempt to diminish her, she turns it into fuel. The situation she's leaving behind, she doesn't just step away from it, she steps over it, because to her it's already dead. The relationship, the friendship, the job, the toxic environment, it lost all power over her the moment she decided she was done. And when she walks away, she does so with the kind of composure that stings the most. No tears, no regret, just an unbothered, unstoppable force moving forward without a second glance. This is what unnerves people. They expect anger, they expect breakdowns, they expected a struggle with the loss. Instead, they watch her thrive almost immediately. She doesn't waste time explaining herself or seeking closure. She is the closure. And the ones left behind, they have to sit with the wreckage knowing she walked right over it and never looked back. The final blow isn't in words or revenge, it's in the way she carries herself. Stronger, freer, untouchable. Because the real victory isn't just leaving, it's leaving on her terms, with her dignity intact and making it clear that whatever tried to break her is now nothing more than dust under her feet. A Sigma female's breaking point isn't loud, it's final. When she's done, there's no room for second chances, no space for apologies, and no interest in explanations. She doesn't just walk away, she reclaims herself. Every piece of her energy that was wasted, every ounce of patience that was stretched too thin, every moment of grace that was taken for granted, she takes it all back without hesitation, without guilt. She doesn't need revenge, but she ensures consequences. She doesn't need closure, because her absence is the closure. She doesn't need validation, because her self-worth was never dependent on those who underestimated her. The people who once mistook her silence for weakness, her kindness for naivety, or her patience for permission, quickly learned that she was never theirs to mistreat. She was simply allowing them space in her world, and once that privilege is revoked, it's permanent. What makes her departure so devastating isn't just that she's gone, it's the way she leaves people with the weight of their own actions, no explanations, no warnings. Just a void where her presence used to be, a haunting realization that they didn't just lose her, they lost the best version of their own lives that existed because she was in it. By the time they understand, by the time regret settles in, she's already miles ahead, thriving, untouchable, a force they can no longer reach. And that is the coldest, most undeniable lesson of all. If this hit deep, don't just sit with it, let's keep the conversation going. Subscribe to the channel for more bold, unapologetic insights like this video if it spoke to you, and drop a comment below with your thoughts. Ever witnessed a Sigma female's breaking point? Let's hear it. And if you know someone who needs to see this, go ahead and share it. Because some lessons are best learned before it's too late.